The thunderous roar of the swollen river echoed across the valley as Katherine Lawson clutched her infant daughter tighter to her chest, the wagon beneath her creaking dangerously with each jolt against the rushing current. It was May of 1875, and the usually peaceful crossing at Wilson's Ford outside Eureka, Nevada had transformed into a deadly trap after 3 days of relentless spring rains. "Hold on, Sarah." Katherine screamed to her 4-year-old, who clung desperately to the wooden seat as the wagon lurched violently. The horses whinnied in terror, struggling against the current that had risen far higher than Katherine had anticipated when she decided to make the crossing. Her husband Thomas had been dead 6 months now, consumption taking him quickly, and leaving her alone with 2 daughters and a homestead she couldn't maintain on her own. Her sister's invitation to come live with her family in Eureka had been a lifeline, but now that decision might cost them everything. The wagon shifted again, water pouring over the sides as the left rear wheel caught on something beneath the surface. Katherine felt tears streaming down her face as she realized their dire situation. They were stuck in the middle of the ford, and the water was still rising. From the riverbank, Samuel Turner watched the scene unfold with mounting alarm. He'd been tracking a stray from his herd when he'd spotted the wagon entering the ford. Any fool could see the river was running too high for a crossing, especially with a load that heavy. Without hesitation, he spurred his horse toward the crossing, his experienced eye assessing the situation. "Hold fast," he shouted, his deep voice barely carrying over the roar of the water. Sam was 26, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of the Nevada sky. 6 years working cattle had built his frame solid as oak, and he moved with the easy confidence of a man who'd faced down his share of dangers. Katherine turned toward the voice, hope flaring in her chest at the sight of the cowboy galloping toward the river's edge. His black Stetson was pulled low against the afternoon sun, but she could see the determination in his face. "My children," she cried out, gesturing to little Sarah, who was sobbing in terror and the infant bundled against her chest. Sam sized up the situation quickly. The wagon was already listing dangerously, and the horses were panicking. He couldn't risk riding out to them. His horse would likely be swept away as well. Instead, he swung down from the saddle, uncoiling the lasso from his pommel as his boots hit the ground. "The rope's coming to you," he called, swinging the loop with practiced ease. "Catch it and tie it around your waist and the little one. I'll pull you to shore, then come back for your daughter." Katherine nodded, understanding immediately. With one arm still clutching her infant, she raised the other, prepared to catch the lifeline that would be their only hope. Sam let the rope fly, the loop sailing through the air with perfect accuracy to land across the wagon seat within Katherine's reach. She grabbed it with desperate fingers, quickly securing it around herself and the baby. "Hold tight to the rope. When I tell you to jump, push away from the wagon toward me," Sam called, wrapping the other end of the rope around his waist and bracing himself against a sturdy cottonwood at the river's edge. Katherine turned to Sarah, pressing a quick kiss to her forehead. "Mama will be right back for you, sweetheart. Stay right here and don't move." The little girl nodded, her eyes wide with fear as she gripped the wagon seat. "Now," Sam shouted as he saw the wagon shift again, threatening to overturn completely. Katherine didn't hesitate. With her baby clutched tightly to her chest, she leaped from the wagon into the churning water. The current immediately seized her, pulling her downstream, but the rope held fast. Sam dug his heels into the muddy bank, muscles straining as he pulled hand over hand, drawing the woman and her infant toward the shore. The cold water shocked Katherine's system, stealing her breath, but she kept her head above the surface, one arm wrapped protectively around her baby. She could feel the powerful tug of the rope around her waist, dragging her steadily toward safety. After what felt like an eternity, Katherine felt the riverbed beneath her feet. Stumbling, she pushed forward as Sam gave one final heave on the rope, pulling her the last few feet to the bank. She collapsed on the muddy shore, gasping for breath, but immediately checking her infant daughter, who was wailing but alive, protected by Katherine's body from the worst of the water. "My other daughter," Katherine gasped, looking up at Sam with desperate eyes. "Please, Sarah's still out there." Sam was already unwinding the rope from Katherine's waist. "Stay here," he ordered, quickly fashioning a new loop. The wagon was tilting more severely now, water sloshing over the sides as the little girl clung to the seat, crying out for her mother. With a precision born from years of roping cattle, Sam cast the lasso again, the loop settling perfectly around the child's small shoulders. "Hold on tight, little one," he called. "I'm going to pull you to shore." Sarah grabbed the rope with both hands as Sam had instructed, her small face a mask of terror. The wagon gave another violent lurch, and in that moment, Sam pulled hard on the rope, yanking the child clear of the vehicle just as it toppled onto its side, disappearing beneath the angry waters. Sarah's small body splashed into the river, but the rope held true. Sam reeled her in with powerful pulls, his muscles burning with the effort as he fought against the current. Within moments, he dragged the soaking, terrified child to the safety of the shore, where Katherine waited with outstretched arms. "Sarah," Katherine cried, gathering her elder daughter close with her free arm while still clutching the infant to her chest. "Thank God! Thank God!" She looked up at Sam, her eyes shining with gratitude. "You saved us. You saved my daughters." Sam nodded, breathing heavily from the exertion, water dripping from his clothes where he'd waded into the shallows to help pull Sarah to safety. "Name's Samuel Turner," he said simply. "Folks call me Sam." "Katherine Lawson," she replied, still trembling from the ordeal. "And these are my daughters, Sarah and Emma." She looked back at the river where the last of her wagon and all her possessions were disappearing downstream. "Everything we own was in that wagon," she whispered, the reality of their situation sinking in. Sam followed her gaze, understanding the devastation of her loss. "Where were you headed?" "Eureka. My sister lives there. Her husband works at the Ruby Hill mine." Katherine brushed wet hair from her face, looking utterly lost. "I don't know what to do now." "Well, first thing is to get you all warm and dry before you catch your death," Sam said practically. "My cabin's not far from here. We can get you settled there for tonight, and tomorrow I'll take you into town to your sister's." Katherine looked at the tall cowboy with uncertainty. In normal circumstances, she would never consider accepting such an offer from a strange man, but these were hardly normal circumstances. He had just saved their lives and they had nowhere else to go. "Thank you," she said finally. "We're in your debt, Mr. Turner." Sam shook his head. "No debt, just doing what any decent man would do." He whistled for his horse, which had retreated up the bank during the commotion. The animal approached cautiously, and Sam took the reins, leading it closer. "Can you ride? You and the little ones can take the saddle, and I'll walk alongside." Katherine nodded, though in truth she hadn't been on horseback in years. But survival demanded adaptability, so she allowed Sam to help her mount, positioning Sarah in front of her while she kept Emma secure against her chest. As they made their way slowly through the scrubby terrain toward Sam's cabin, Katherine found herself studying her rescuer. His movements were fluid and confident, his broad shoulders easily bearing the weight of his soaked clothing. Despite his rough exterior, there was a gentleness to how he led the horse, carefully avoiding jarring the exhausted riders. "You're not from around here," Sam observed after they'd traveled in silence for a while. Katherine shook her head. We had a small farm near Carson City. After my husband died last winter, I couldn't manage it alone. Sam nodded, understanding all too well the harsh realities of frontier life. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Lawson. Katherine, please, she said softly. And thank you. They crested a small ridge, and Katherine saw a modest cabin nestled in a protected hollow, with a corral for horses and a small barn nearby. It was a simple place but well maintained, the mark of a man who took pride in his property. It's not much, Sam said, noticing her appraising look, but it's solid and dry. It looks wonderful, Katherine replied honestly, the prospect of shelter overwhelming after their ordeal. Sam helped them dismount and led them inside. The cabin was indeed simple, one main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a bed in the corner, and various supplies organized neatly along the walls. A door at the back presumably led to a lean-to or storage area. I'll build up the fire, Sam said, immediately setting to work. There are some dry clothes in that trunk. They'll be too big, but they're clean. Katherine nodded gratefully, setting Emma down on the bed while she helped Sarah out of her soaked dress. Both girls were shivering, their lips tinged with blue from the cold river water. Here, Sam said, handing Katherine a worn but clean flannel shirt. For the little one, and this might work for you. He offered a smaller shirt and a pair of trousers with suspenders. They belonged to my younger brother before he moved back east. Katherine accepted the clothing with murmured thanks, then hesitated, looking around the one-room cabin. Understanding her discomfort, Sam nodded toward the door. I'll tend to my horse and fetch more firewood. Take your time getting changed. Once alone, Katherine quickly dressed her daughters and herself in the borrowed clothes, rolling up sleeves and pant legs as necessary. The fire was already warming the small space, and she positioned her daughters close to it, wrapping them in a blanket from Sam's bed. When Sam returned with an armload of split pine, Katherine had managed to regain some composure. Her long brown hair was beginning to dry, falling in waves down her back, and though the borrowed clothes swallowed her slender frame, she tied a piece of rope around her waist to keep the trousers up. Sam tried not to stare as he added wood to the fire. She was beautiful, even in her disheveled state, perhaps 30 years old, with delicate features and expressive hazel eyes that showed both strength and vulnerability. He reminded himself that she was a widow with 2 small children, recently rescued from a deadly situation. The last thing she needed was unwanted attention. "Are you hungry?" he asked, turning to the small cupboard beside the fireplace. "I've got beans, bacon, and coffee, not much else, I'm afraid." "That sounds wonderful," Katherine replied, realizing suddenly how famished they all were. "Can I help?" Sam shook his head. "Rest. You've been through enough today." As he set about preparing a simple meal, Katherine watched him move efficiently around the small space. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness that made her feel safe for the first time since Thomas had fallen ill. "You live out here alone?" she asked. Sam nodded, slicing bacon into a cast iron skillet. 5 years now. "I work for the Silver Star Ranch, managing their northern pastures. Owner lets me use this cabin in exchange for keeping an eye on things." "It must get lonely," Katherine observed. Sam shrugged. "I've got my horse and my thoughts, books when the winter sets in. It suits me well enough." He glanced at the girls, who were beginning to droop with exhaustion despite their hunger. "But I reckon it would be hard on little ones." "They've been through so much already," Katherine said softly, brushing Sarah's damp hair back from her forehead. "First losing their father, then having to leave the only home they've known." Sam didn't respond immediately, focusing on cooking, but Katherine could see the sympathy in his eyes. When the food was ready, he served it on tin plates, setting them on the table. "Thank you," Katherine said as she helped her daughters to the table, "for everything." Sam nodded, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. "But they didn't," Katherine replied. "You did." The simple meal was consumed in relative silence, broken only by the occasional question from Sarah, who seemed to be recovering her spirits now that she was warm, dry, and fed. Emma had fallen asleep against Katherine's shoulder, exhausted by the day's events. "There's the bed for you and the little ones," Sam said when they'd finished eating. "I'll sleep by the fire." Katherine started to protest, but Sam held up a hand. "I won't hear otherwise, Mrs. Lawson. Katherine," he corrected himself. "You need proper rest after what you've been through." Too exhausted to argue, Katherine nodded gratefully. "Just for tonight. Tomorrow we'll go to my sister's." Sam helped her settle the girls in the bed, then made himself a pallet near the fire. As Katherine lay in the darkness, her daughters curled against her, she found herself watching the silhouette of the man who had saved them. There was something reassuring about his presence, something that made her feel protected in a way she hadn't since Thomas had died. With that comforting thought, she finally surrendered to sleep. The sound of the rain that had begun falling again on the cabin roof, a gentle lullaby after the terror of the day. Sam lay awake much longer, listening to the soft breathing of the woman and children in his bed. It had been years since anyone besides himself had slept in this cabin. The silence that usually brought him peace now felt empty by comparison. Somewhere in the night, Emma began to fuss, her tiny cries filling the small space. Sam heard Katherine's soothing whispers, watched her silhouette as she rose to pace the floor with the infant. Without thinking, he stood and moved toward them. "May I?" he asked quietly, holding out his arms. Katherine hesitated only briefly before handing over her daughter. To her surprise, Sam cradled the baby with practiced ease, his large hands gentle as he rocked Emma back and forth. "You have children," Katherine whispered, unable to hide her curiosity. Sam shook his head, a sad smile crossing his face in the dim firelight. "Just lots of younger siblings." "I'm the eldest of 7. 7, Katherine couldn't hide her astonishment. "Where are they now?" "Scattered to the winds," Sam replied, his voice low. 2 back east with our parents, 1 married in Sacramento, 1 in the ground outside Tucson. 2 I haven't heard from in years." Katherine heard the undercurrent of loss in his words but didn't press further. Instead, she watched as Emma quieted in his arms, her tiny hand curling around one of his fingers. "She likes you," Katherine observed. "Smart kid," Sam replied with a small smile. "Knows who pulled her from the river." "That was me," Katherine corrected. "You pulled me from the river while I was holding her." Sam's smile widened. "Technicalities." He looked down at the now sleeping infant. "She's beautiful. Both your girls are." "Thank you," Katherine whispered, accepting Emma back into her arms. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Katherine felt an unexpected warmth at the brief contact. "Good night, Mr. Turner." "Sam," he reminded her, stepping back toward his pallet. "Good night, Katherine." Morning brought clearing skies and the realization of all that had been lost. Katherine sat at Sam's table, nursing Emma while Sarah ate another meal of beans and bacon. Their clothes from yesterday had been hung to dry by the fire overnight and were now stiff but wearable. "I've been thinking," Sam said as he poured her a cup of coffee, "about getting you to your sister's in Eureka." Katherine nodded, her expression troubled. "I lost everything in that wagon. All our clothes, Thomas's pocket watch, the deed to our property, what little money we had." Her voice trailed off. "The deed can be replaced through the land office," Sam said practically. "As for the rest," he hesitated. "I don't have much, but what I have is yours if you need it." Katherine looked up, startled by the offer. "You've done more than enough already." "I couldn't possibly." "It's not charity," Sam interrupted. "It's just being neighborly." "We're hardly neighbors," Katherine pointed out, though her tone was gentle. Sam shrugged. "Close enough in these parts." He picked up his hat from the table. "I need to check on a few things before we head to town. Won't be long." When he had gone, Katherine moved around the cabin, straightening what little she could to repay his hospitality. Sarah followed her, asking questions about their rescuer and what would happen next. Katherine answered as best she could, though in truth, she had no idea what awaited them in Eureka. Her sister Elizabeth had a small house already crowded with her own 3 children. Adding Katherine and her daughters would be a significant burden, but there seemed to be no alternative. Sam returned within the hour, leading not only his own horse but also a sturdy mule with a pack saddle. "Found this old fellow wandering near the ford," he explained. "Reckon he got loose from your wagon when it went over. He's carrying some of your things that washed up downstream." Katherine hurried outside, hope surging through her. The mule was indeed one of hers, and the pack secured to its sides contained some of their belongings soaked but salvageable. There were some clothes, a few cooking utensils, and most precious of all, the small wooden box containing her husband's pocket watch and her mother's locket. "Oh, Sam," she cried, impulsively throwing her arms around him. "Thank you." Sam stiffened at the unexpected embrace, then awkwardly patted her back. "Just lucky I spotted him. Might find more of your things downriver in the coming days." Katherine stepped back, embarrassed by her display. "This is more than I dared hope for, the most important things at least." Sam nodded, pleased by her reaction. "We should get moving if we want to reach town before dark. The road will be muddy after the rain." The journey to Eureka was slow going, with Sam leading the way on foot, Katherine riding his horse with Emma in her arms, and Sarah perched on the mule's pack saddle. The storm had indeed left the road a muddy mess, and twice they had to detour around sections that were completely washed out. As they traveled, Katherine found herself increasingly drawn to the quiet cowboy who led them so capably. There was something about his steady presence that brought a comfort she hadn't expected to find again after Thomas's death. Where her husband had been bookish and gentle, Sam was all practical capability, his strength evident in every movement. "Tell me about your sister," Sam said as they paused to rest the animals in the early afternoon. Katherine smiled, thinking of Elizabeth. "She's 3 years younger than me. Married Daniel right 10 years ago and moved out here when he got work in the mines. They have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and she's expecting you." "Yes. I sent a letter 2 weeks ago telling her we were coming." Katherine's face fell. "Though I doubt she's expecting us to arrive with nothing but the clothes on our backs." "You have more than that now," Sam reminded her, nodding toward the mule and its recovered cargo. "And you have your daughters, safe and sound. That's what matters most." Katherine nodded, touched by his perspective. "You're right, of course." They resumed their journey, and as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, the buildings of Eureka came into view. The mining town sprawled across the hillside, its main street bustling with activity despite the muddy conditions. "You know where your sister lives?" Sam asked as they approached the outskirts. Katherine nodded. "Ruby Hill Road near the mine entrance. Daniel walks to work from there." Sam guided them through the town, ignoring the curious stares of passers-by. Katherine was acutely aware of their bedraggled appearance, her in borrowed men's clothes several sizes too large, the girls in their rumpled dresses, all of them mud splattered from the journey. They found the right residence easily enough, a modest clapboard house with a small yard where 2 boys were engaged in a spirited game of marbles. The boys looked up as the unusual party approached, then scrambled to their feet. "Ma," one shouted, running for the house. "Somebody's here." A moment later, Elizabeth Wright appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. She was shorter than Katherine, but with the same brown hair and delicate features. Her expression changed from curiosity to shock as she recognized her sister. "Katherine," she gasped, hurrying down the steps. "Good heavens, what happened to you? We've been expecting you for days." Katherine slid from Sam's horse, emotions overwhelming her as her sister embraced her. "Oh, Lizzie, it's been such an ordeal. The river at Wilson's Ford was flooded and our wagon overturned. We would have drowned if not for Mr. Turner here." Elizabeth turned to Sam, who stood awkwardly holding the horse's reins. "You saved my sister." Sam shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. "Just happened to be in the right place at the right time, madam." "He's being modest," Katherine said. "He risked his own life to pull us from the river. We lost almost everything, but he saved what matters most." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears as she pulled her nieces close. "Thank God you're safe. All of you, come inside. You must be exhausted and starving." Sam shook his head, handing the reins of his horse to Katherine. "I should be getting back. Daylight's wasting." "Nonsense," Elizabeth declared. "You'll stay for supper at least. Daniel will want to thank you properly when he returns from the mine." Before Sam could protest further, Katherine placed a hand on his arm. "Please, Sam. It would mean a lot to us." Something in her eyes made it impossible for him to refuse. With a reluctant nod, he secured the animals to the hitching post and followed the women into the house. The Wright home was small but welcoming, filled with the scent of baking bread and the sound of children's laughter. Elizabeth's daughter, Mary, quickly took charge of her cousins, showing them a collection of rag dolls while the adults settled at the kitchen table. "Now tell me everything," Elizabeth insisted as she poured coffee for them. Katherine recounted the disaster at the ford and Sam's dramatic rescue, her voice breaking with emotion as she described the moment when she thought she might lose Sarah. Throughout the telling, Sam remained silent, uncomfortable being the center of such attention. "We owe you a tremendous debt, Mr. Turner," Elizabeth said when Katherine had finished. "No debt," Sam replied, the same words he'd given Katherine. "Just glad I could help." Daniel Wright arrived home as supper was being served, a tall man with coal dust still clinging to his beard despite his efforts to wash it away. He listened with growing astonishment to the story of the river rescue, then insisted on shaking Sam's hand with such vigor that the cowboy winced. "You'll stay the night," Daniel declared. "It's too late to start back, and after what you've done for my family, it's the least we can offer." Sam glanced at Katherine, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I wouldn't want to impose. You've already got a full house." "Nonsense," Elizabeth said firmly. "Daniel will make up a bed in the shed. It's not fancy, but it's dry and warm enough." Recognizing that further protest would be futile, Sam acquiesced. As they ate the simple but hearty meal, he found himself repeatedly drawn to Katherine's face, to the way she smiled at her daughters and the gentle manner in which she helped Emma with her food. There was a quiet strength to her that called to something deep within him. After supper, while Daniel took Sam to settle the animals and prepare his sleeping quarters, Katherine helped Elizabeth with the dishes. The sisters worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before Elizabeth spoke. "He seems like a good man," she observed casually. Katherine nodded, keeping her eyes on the plate she was drying. "He is. I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't come along when he did." "And handsome, too," Elizabeth added with a sly glance. Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Lizzie, don't start. I've only just met him, and under the most desperate circumstances." "Sometimes that's how the best love stories begin," Elizabeth replied, her tone light but her eyes serious. "I remember how you were after Thomas died, how you said you'd never find that kind of love again." "And I won't," Katherine said firmly. "What Thomas and I had was special." "Of course it was," Elizabeth agreed. "But that doesn't mean you can't find something different but equally meaningful. You're still young, Kate, only 32. The girls need a father and you deserve happiness." Katherine set down the dish with more force than necessary. "I came here to start over, not to find a husband. I need to focus on providing for my daughters." Elizabeth raised her hands in surrender. "I'm just saying, don't close your heart to possibilities. Especially when they come in the form of tall cowboys who risk their lives to save yours." Outside in the shed that would serve as his quarters for the night, Sam was having a similar conversation with Daniel Wright. "She's a fine woman," Daniel said as he helped Sam arrange blankets on a straw pallet. "Been through hell these past months from what Lizzie tells me." Sam nodded noncommittally, unsure where the conversation was heading. "Losing Thomas hit her hard," Daniel continued. "They were childhood sweethearts, married young. Good man, but not much of a farmer. Left her with little more than those two sweet girls and a piece of land she couldn't work herself." "She seems capable enough," Sam observed. Daniel chuckled. "Oh, she's capable all right. Stubborn as a mule too, according to Lizzie. But even the most capable woman faces hard odds out here alone." He fixed Sam with a pointed look. "She'll be staying with us for a while, getting her bearings. If you wanted to call on her, that would be acceptable." Sam nearly dropped the blanket he was holding. "Call on her, Mr. Wright, I barely know the woman." "But you'd like to know her better," Daniel said shrewdly. "I saw how you looked at her at supper. No shame in it. She's been a widow long enough that no one would think it improper." Sam was grateful for the dim lantern light that hid his reddening face. "I'm not exactly in a position to court anyone. My cabin's half a day's ride away and I'm often gone for weeks working cattle." Daniel shrugged. "Circumstances change, just something to think about." He clapped Sam on the shoulder. "Get some rest. Morning comes early." Alone in the shed, Sam stretched out on the makeshift bed, his thoughts in turmoil. He couldn't deny that Katherine Lawson had stirred something in him that he'd thought long buried, a longing for connection, for family, for something more than the solitary existence he'd built for himself. But Daniel's suggestion seemed presumptuous at best, foolhardy at worst. Katherine was still grieving her husband, still finding her way in a world that had been turned upside down. The last thing she needed was a rough cowhand with nothing to offer but a one-room cabin and an uncertain future. And yet, as sleep finally claimed him, his dreams were filled with hazel eyes and the feeling of a woman's grateful embrace. Morning brought a flurry of activity, as Elizabeth insisted on preparing a substantial breakfast before Sam's departure. Katherine appeared in borrowed clothes from her sister, her hair neatly braided and her daughters freshly scrubbed and dressed. The transformation was striking from bedraggled survivor to composed young widow, and Sam found himself suddenly tongue-tied in her presence. "I've packed some food for your journey," Elizabeth told him as they finished eating. "It's the least we can do." "That's very kind, madam," Sam replied, acutely aware of Katherine watching him from across the table. As he prepared to leave, loading his saddlebags and checking his horse's tack, Katherine approached him in the yard, Emma in her arms and Sarah clinging to her skirts. "I wanted to thank you again," she said softly. "Words seem inadequate for what you did for us." Sam ducked his head, embarrassed by her gratitude. "I'm just glad I was there to help. Will we see you again?" The question surprised them both, hanging in the air between them. Sam hesitated, Daniel's words from the previous night echoing in his mind. "I come to town for supplies every few weeks, perhaps." He trailed off, uncertain how to proceed. Katherine smiled, understanding his hesitation. "Perhaps you could call on us when you do. The girls would like to see you again." Her cheeks colored slightly. "And so would I." Sam felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest. "I'd like that very much." "Good," Katherine said with a decisive nod. "Then it's settled." As Sam mounted his horse, Katherine impulsively stepped forward, placing a hand on his boot. "Be careful crossing that ford," she said, her tone light but her eyes serious. Sam smiled down at her, tipping his hat. "Yes, madam. I've had a recent lesson in the dangers of high water." With a final nod to the assembled Wright family, he turned his horse and rode away, feeling Katherine's eyes on him until he rounded the corner at the end of the street. The journey back to his cabin seemed longer than usual, his thoughts continually returning to the widow and her daughters. By the time he reached the ford, now receded to its normal level, he had made a decision. In 2 weeks, when he next went to Eureka for supplies, he would call on Katherine Lawson. True to his word, exactly 14 days later, Sam found himself standing nervously on the porch of the Wright home, a small package tucked under his arm. He had bathed thoroughly, trimmed his beard, and worn his best shirt efforts that had earned knowing smirks from the men he worked with at the Silver Star Ranch. It was Elizabeth who answered his knock, her face breaking into a wide smile at the sight of him. "Mr. Turner." "What a pleasant surprise. Please come in." Sam removed his hat as he stepped inside, his eyes automatically scanning the room for Katherine. "I hope I'm not intruding, Mrs. Wright." "Not at all. Katherine's just putting Emma down for her nap. Sarah's playing at the neighbor's." Elizabeth ushered him toward the sitting area. "Can I offer you some coffee while you wait?" Before Sam could respond, Katherine appeared in the doorway, stopping short when she saw him. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color in her eyes, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Sam," she said softly, pleasure evident in her voice. "You came." "I said I would," he replied, suddenly very conscious of the package in his hands. "I brought something for the girls." He held it out awkwardly. "And for you." Katherine accepted the package with a curious smile. "You didn't need to bring anything." "I wanted to," Sam said simply. Elizabeth, watching this exchange with undisguised interest, suddenly remembered an urgent errand. "I just realized I promised Mrs. Johnson next door that I'd help her with her mending," she said, already reaching for her shawl. "I shouldn't be gone long. Katherine, why don't you show Mr. Turner the garden while you open his gift?" Before either could protest, Elizabeth had slipped out the door, leaving them alone except for the sleeping infant in the next room. Katherine shook her head, laughing softly. "My sister is about as subtle as a stampeding buffalo." "Does that bother you?" Sam asked, suddenly unsure. "No," Katherine replied, meeting his eyes. "It doesn't." She gestured toward the back door. "Shall we see this garden she's so proud of?" The garden was small but well tended, with neat rows of vegetables and a few hardy flowers blooming despite the Nevada heat. They sat on a wooden bench beneath the shade of a young cottonwood tree, the package resting between them. "Open it," Sam encouraged. Katherine untied the string and carefully unwrapped the brown paper. Inside was a beautiful hand-carved wooden box, its lid decorated with an intricate pattern of leaves and flowers. "Sam," she breathed, running her fingers over the detailed carving. "Did you make this?" He nodded, pleased by her reaction. Winter evenings get long in that cabin, carving passes the time. Katherine opened the box to find 3 smaller items inside: a wooden doll for Sarah, a tiny rattle for Emma, and for Katherine herself, a delicate hair comb also carved from wood. "These are beautiful," she said, genuine emotion in her voice. "You're very talented." "Just something to remember me by," Sam said, then added hastily, Not that I'm going anywhere. I just meant. Katherine laid a hand on his arm, stopping his fumbled explanation. I know what you meant. And we don't need these to remember you, though I'll treasure them. You saved our lives, Sam. That's not something any of us will forget. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. Sam was acutely aware of her hand still resting on his arm, of the subtle scent of lavender that surrounded her, of how the dappled sunlight through the tree leaves cast patterns across her face. "How are you settling in?" he asked finally, breaking the moment. Katherine withdrew her hand, focusing on the carved box in her lap. "As well as can be expected. Elizabeth and Daniel have been very kind, but it's difficult being dependent on others' charity. I've been taking in mending to earn my keep, but it's hardly enough to support the girls and myself." "Any word on your property in Carson City?" Katherine sighed. "Daniel went to the land office last week. The deed can be replaced, but selling the farm from here will be challenging, and even if I do, it won't bring much." She looked up at him with a small smile. "But we're managing. One day at a time." Sam nodded, understanding the courage it took to maintain such optimism in the face of adversity. "If there's anything I can do to help—" "You've done more than enough already," Katherine assured him. "But I am glad you came today. It's good to see you." "It's good to see you too," Sam replied, surprising himself with his honesty. "I've thought about all of you often these past weeks." A faint blush colored Katherine's cheeks. "We've thought of you as well. Sarah asks about the man with the rope almost daily." Sam chuckled. "High praise indeed." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the afternoon sun warming the garden around them. "Will you stay for supper?" Katherine asked suddenly. "Daniel should be home soon, and Sarah would be disappointed if she missed seeing you." Sam hesitated only briefly. "I'd be honored." The evening that followed was one of the most pleasant Sam could remember. Sarah had indeed been overjoyed to see him, immediately demanding he admire her new wooden doll, and then insisting he tell the story of the river rescue, which she seemed to have transformed in her 4-year-old mind into an adventure rather than a near tragedy. Daniel and Elizabeth welcomed him warmly, treating him like an old friend rather than a recent acquaintance. Even baby Emma seemed to recognize him, cooing and reaching for him when Katherine placed her in his arms after supper. As the evening drew to a close, Sam found himself reluctant to leave. The ride home, though modest and crowded, held a warmth his solitary cabin lacked. And at the center of that warmth was Katherine, whose quiet strength and gentle humor had drawn him in more completely than he'd anticipated. When he finally rose to take his leave, Katherine walked him to the door while the others remained in the sitting room. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "It meant a lot to the girls, and to me." "When I'm next in town," Sam began. "Yes," Katherine interrupted, her eyes meeting his. "Please call on us again." Impulsively, Sam reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his. "I will. You have my word." The touch sent a current of awareness through them both, a recognition of something growing between them that neither was quite ready to name. As Sam rode back to his cabin under a sky full of stars, he found himself planning his next trip to town with an eagerness that had nothing to do with supplies. Over the next 3 months, Sam's visits to Eureka became more frequent. What started as occasional calls stretched into day-long visits, with Sam often arriving early in the morning and staying until well after supper. Each visit strengthened the bond growing between him and Katherine, a connection built on shared conversations, quiet moments in Elizabeth's garden, and the joy of watching her daughters flourish under his attentive care. Sam taught Sarah to ride on a gentle pony he borrowed from a friend in town, delighting in her fearless enthusiasm. He rocked Emma to sleep when Katherine was busy, his deep voice humming lullabies he remembered from his own childhood. And in quiet moments, he and Katherine shared stories of their lives as years driving cattle across the Western Territories, her childhood in Ohio before her family headed west. The townsfolk began to take notice of the tall cowboy's regular visits to the right home, and speculation ran rampant. Elizabeth fielded questions with a knowing smile but kept her sister's confidence. Recognizing the delicate dance, Katherine and Sam were engaged in two wounded souls cautiously finding their way toward each other. For Katherine, Sam's steady presence became an anchor in a life that had been adrift since Thomas's death. Where grief had once consumed her, she now found herself looking forward to each day, especially those when Sam was expected. The girls adored him, and even Emma, now nearly a year old, would reach for him the moment he entered the room. It was during his visit in late August, as summer's heat began to give way to autumn's cooler temperatures, that everything changed. Sam had arrived in town the previous evening and stayed at the modest hotel on Main Street. In the morning, he appeared at the right home with news. "I've been offered a new position," he announced as they sat in the garden after breakfast, the girls playing nearby under Elizabeth's watchful eye. "Foreman of the Silver Star Ranch. Old Bill Jenkins is retiring come winter." "Sam, that's wonderful," Katherine exclaimed, genuine pleasure in her voice. "You deserve it." Sam nodded, his expression serious. "It means more responsibility, more money too, and a proper house instead of that cabin." Katherine studied his face, sensing there was more to this news than he was saying. "You don't seem entirely pleased." "The ranch headquarters is near Austin," Sam explained. "Nearly 60 miles from here." The implications hit Katherine with unexpected force. Austin might as well have been on the moon for all the chance she'd have of seeing him regularly if he moved there. "I see," she said quietly, trying to mask her disappointment. "That's a significant opportunity. You should take it." Sam reached for her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "I haven't given them my answer yet." Katherine looked up, confusion in her eyes. "Why not? It's clearly a step up from your current position." "Because there are other considerations now," Sam said, his voice low and intense. "Things that matter more than a job title or a bigger paycheck." Katherine's heart began to race as his meaning became clear. "Sam, I know it hasn't been that long," he continued, holding her gaze. "Just a few months since that day at the ford. But I think we both know what's happening between us, Katherine." She nodded, unable to deny the truth of his words. What had begun as gratitude had transformed into something deeper, something that made her heart lighter and her steps quicker whenever she knew he was coming. "I care for you," Sam said simply. "For you and for those two little girls, and I hope that you might care for me too." "I do," Katherine whispered, the admission both frightening and freeing. "More than I expected to, more than I thought possible after Thomas." Sam's face softened at her words. "Then I need to ask you something important, something I've been thinking about for weeks now." Katherine held her breath, suddenly certain of what was coming. "I won't take that job in Austin," Sam said firmly. "Not if it means leaving you. Instead, I'd like to buy land here near Eureka. Build a proper home for a family." He squeezed her hand gently. "For our family, if you'll have me." Tears welled in Katherine's eyes as the full import of his words registered. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Sam nodded, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "I'm asking if you'll marry me, Katherine Lawson. If you'll let me be a husband to you and a father to your girls. If you'll give me the chance to build a life with you that's full of the happiness you deserve." Katherine's free hand went to her mouth, emotion overwhelming her for a moment. This was not a decision to be made lightly, not with two young lives depending on her, and yet in her heart she already knew her answer. "The girls adore you," she said softly. "And I." She took a deep breath. "I've fallen in love with you, Sam Turner, something I never thought would happen again." Sam's face lit with hope. "Is that a yes?" Katherine laughed through her tears. "It's a yes. Yes, I'll marry you." Sam let out a whoop that startled the birds from the cottonwood tree and brought Elizabeth hurrying into the garden, concerned by the commotion. One look at their joined hands and radiant faces told her everything she needed to know. "Well, it's about time," she declared, hands on hips but smile wide. "Daniel owes me $1. He said it would take you until Christmas at least." Katherine blushed furiously. "You were betting on us. Half the town is," Elizabeth replied cheerfully. "Mrs. Peterson at the general store had October, so I suppose she wins the pot." Sam laughed, the sound rich and joyful. "I hope nobody's too disappointed we didn't wait longer." "I'm certainly not," Katherine said, squeezing his hand. Sarah, attracted by the adults' laughter, abandoned her play to investigate. "Why is everyone so happy?" she demanded, looking from one smiling face to another. Katherine knelt down to her daughter's level, taking her small hands. "Mr. Turner has asked Mama to marry him, sweetheart. That means he would come to live with us and be like a new papa to you and Emma. How would you feel about that?" Sarah's eyes widened as she processed this information. She looked solemnly at Sam, who had knelt beside Katherine. "Would you teach me to ride a real horse, not just a pony?" she asked with the directness of childhood. Sam nodded, equally serious. "When you're a bit bigger, yes, and I'd teach you to rope and to track animals in the hills, whatever you want to learn." Sarah considered this offer carefully, then nodded. "All right then, you can marry Mama." The adults burst into laughter at her solemn permission, and Sam swept the little girl up in a hug that had her giggling with delight. "When?" Elizabeth asked once the initial excitement had settled. "How soon can we plan a wedding?" Katherine looked at Sam, the question in her eyes as well. In truth, now that the decision was made, she saw no reason to wait. "As soon as the Reverend can arrange it," Sam answered, reading her thoughts. "I've waited long enough to start my life with Katherine and the girls." And so it was that on a crisp October morning, just 4 months after their fateful meeting at Wilson's Ford, Katherine Lawson became Katherine Turner in a simple ceremony at Eureka's small church. Sarah served proudly as flower girl, strewing petals from Elizabeth's garden along the aisle, while Emma, now walking her first unsteady steps, was carried by her new Uncle Daniel. The entire town turned out for the occasion, curious to witness the culmination of the romance that had been the subject of so much speculation. Katherine wore a dress of pale blue silk that Elizabeth had insisted on ordering from San Francisco, declaring that her sister deserved something special for her wedding day. Sam, nearly unrecognizable in a new black suit, waited at the altar with an expression of such naked adoration that several of the town's older women were seen dabbing at their eyes before the bride even appeared. "You look beautiful," Sam whispered as Katherine joined him before Reverend Moore. "And you look very handsome," she replied, taking in his freshly trimmed hair and beard. "Almost like a different man." "Same man," Sam assured her with a smile. "Just cleaned up a bit for the occasion." The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, with vows that acknowledged both the unexpected nature of their union and the depth of feeling that had grown between them. When Reverend Moore pronounced them man and wife, Sam's kiss was tender but thorough, bringing a chorus of cheers from the assembled guests. The celebration afterward spilled from the church into the town's small hotel dining room, where a feast had been prepared by the women of Eureka. There was dancing and laughter, with baby Emma passed from arms to arms while Sarah twirled happily with every willing partner. As evening approached, Sam found his bride sitting quietly at a table, watching their daughters with a contented smile. "Happy, Mrs. Turner?" he asked, taking the seat beside her. "Very," Katherine replied, leaning against his shoulder. "Though still a bit overwhelmed by it all, it's happened so quickly." "Having second thoughts?" Sam asked, only half joking. Katherine turned to him, her expression serious. "Not a single one. When I think of where we were just a few months ago, me nearly drowning with my children, you a stranger with a rope, it seems impossible that we're here now. And yet, it feels absolutely right." Sam took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "It is right. Some things just are, even when they come about in the strangest ways." "Speaking of strange ways," Katherine said, a teasing light in her eyes, "have I thanked you properly for pulling me from that river?" "You have," Sam assured her. "Many times, but I wouldn't object to being thanked again." "Regularly. For the next 50 years or so." Katherine laughed, the sound full of promise for the future they would build together. "That can be arranged." As darkness fell, the newlyweds slipped away from the celebration, retrieving their daughters and making their way to the small house Sam had purchased on the edge of town. It was nothing grand, 3 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but it was theirs, a beginning for their new family. Sam carried a sleeping Emma across the threshold while Katherine followed with Sarah, who was fighting valiantly against exhaustion. "Welcome home," Sam said softly as they stood together in the simple main room, illuminated by a single lamp he had lit earlier in the day. Katherine looked around at the modest furnishings: a table with 4 chairs, a settee by the hearth, a rocking chair in the corner, all chosen with care by the man who had so unexpectedly become her husband. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. After months of living in her sister's crowded home, this small house represented independence and a fresh start. "Absolutely perfect." Later, after the girls had been settled in their new bedroom, Katherine and Sam stood together on the small porch, looking up at the star-filled Nevada sky. "I never expected this," Katherine admitted, nestled against his side. "After Thomas died, I thought that chapter of my life was closed forever. I was resigned to being alone, to raising the girls by myself. And I never expected to find a wife and family out here," Sam replied. "Figured I'd live out my days in that cabin, just me and whatever horse I was riding at the time." He turned to face her, framing her face with his hands. "But then I saw that wagon in the river and everything changed." "You saved us," Katherine said simply. Sam shook his head. "I think maybe we saved each other." As his lips met hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, Katherine knew he was right. What had begun as a desperate rescue at a flooded river crossing had become something far more profound: a second chance at love for 2 people who had believed such opportunities were behind them. Inside the small house, their daughters slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge, even 4-year-old Sarah in her childish way, that their family was complete again. And outside, under the vast Nevada sky, Sam and Katherine Turner embraced their new beginning, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together and the love that would carry them forward into whatever adventures awaited. Over the next 5 years, the Turner family flourished in Eureka. Sam's reputation as a skilled cattleman led to opportunities beyond what he had imagined, eventually allowing him to purchase his own small ranch just outside town. Katherine, with her keen mind for figures, kept the books for their growing operation while still maintaining their home and caring for their expanding family. Emma grew from toddler to spirited young girl, with her mother's delicate features and her adoptive father's stubborn determination. Sarah, now 9, had become Sam's shadow, accompanying him whenever possible as he worked with the cattle and horses, absorbing his knowledge of ranching with an enthusiasm that made him prouder than he could express. And 2 years after their wedding, Katherine had given birth to their son, Thomas Samuel Turner, named for the father he would never know and the one who had chosen to love him as his own. Young Tommy, as he was called, had his father's broad build and his mother's thoughtful nature, a perfect blend of the two people who had found each other against all odds at a treacherous river crossing. On the 5th anniversary of that fateful day at Wilson's Ford, Sam and Katherine rode out together to visit the spot where their story had begun. The children stayed behind with Elizabeth, who now had 4 of her own and considered looking after her sister's brood for a day, a fair exchange for the many times Katherine had done the same for her. The ford was peaceful now, the river running clear and shallow in the late spring sunshine. They dismounted, tethering their horses to a nearby cottonwood tree that had grown significantly since they'd last stood in its shade. "Hard to believe it was so dangerous that day," Katherine remarked, looking at the gentle flow of water. "It seems so benign now." Sam nodded, his arm around her waist as they surveyed the scene. "Nature has a way of fooling you like that. Gentle one day, deadly the next." Katherine leaned against him, content in the solid warmth of his presence. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you hadn't come along when you did? If you'd been just a few minutes later?" "Sometimes," Sam admitted, "but I try not to dwell on it. What matters is that I was here, and you were brave enough to trust a stranger with a rope." Katherine smiled at the memory. "I didn't have much choice, but I knew, somehow, that you wouldn't let us down." She turned to face him, her hands resting on his chest. "I never could have imagined then what that moment would lead to, how completely my life would change." "For the better, I hope," Sam said, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she loved. "So much better," Katherine assured him, rising on tiptoes to kiss him softly. "You gave me and the girls a second chance at happiness. You gave us a home and a future." "You gave me a family," Sam replied simply. "Something I never thought I'd have." They stood together at the river's edge, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment, the challenges they'd faced together, the joy they'd found in building their life, the deep and abiding love that had grown from the seeds planted on that desperate day 5 years earlier. "What do you think the next 5 years will bring?" Katherine asked as they eventually turned back toward their horses. Sam smiled, helping her mount before swinging into his own saddle. "More of the same, I hope. More children if you're willing. A bigger ranch, perhaps." "Watching our family grow and thrive." Katherine nodded, her heart full at the simple vision of their future together. "That sounds perfect to me." As they rode home side by side, the setting sun casting long shadows across the Nevada landscape, Katherine found herself offering a silent prayer of gratitude for the man beside her, for the life they'd built, and for the river that had nearly taken everything but had instead given her more than she could have ever imagined. In the distance, she could see the lights of Eureka beginning to twinkle as dusk descended, and beyond the town, the silhouette of their ranch against the darkening sky. Their home. Their future. A life rescued from the waters and rebuilt with love, one day at a time.